We often think of city planning as a modern invention, but historical landscapes were violently forced into strict geometric patterns, concentric rings, massive grids, and jagged stars by invisible pressures. Take Himeji Castle in Japan. Its tiered white facades and elegant swooping roofs appear to prioritize beauty, earning it the nickname the White Heron. Similarly, structures like Germany's Neuschwanstein project a towering cliffside romanticism, cementing the idea that castles are monuments to royal vanity. Pre-modern fortresses were calculated survival engines. Their exact shapes and street layouts were the direct result of specific ballistic threats, localized topography, and strict resource limits. By isolating 4 distinct regional models, Japan, Europe, China, and India, we can analyze the variables that shaped them. The physical geometry of a civilization's walls and streets allows us to reverse engineer its technological limitations, its environmental threats, and the precise socio-political hierarchy of its rulers. The first variable of urban morphology is the ballistic vector. The proliferation of heavy artillery in the 15th century rendered medieval city planning obsolete. In Europe, traditional defenses relied on tall, relatively thin stone walls. When subjected to the direct kinetic impact of cannon fire, these vertical surfaces shattered. Engineers responded by creating the Trace Italienne, widely known as the Star Fort. To absorb artillery impacts, the new walls had to be built significantly lower to the ground, vastly thicker, and angled. This schematic illustrates the geometry of a star fort. The protruding points were mathematically calculated to create overlapping fields of fire. By angling the defensive lines outward, engineers eliminated the blind spots where enemy artillery teams could safely set up. Meanwhile, in China, cannons were also integrated into warfare. Yet Chinese urban planning never adopted the star fort model. Long before gunpowder became a primary threat, Chinese defensive walls already possessed immense mass. The walls of Xi'an reached up to 18 meters thick, constructed from dense layers of rammed earth. This extreme thickness was a dual-purpose engineering solution. Chinese cities located on vast plains frequently faced catastrophic flooding from the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. The massive walls functioned as necessary flood levees. Their immunity to early cannon fire was an accidental byproduct of ecological constraints. Architectural evolution here was driven by the sheer hydrostatic pressure of floodwaters, which naturally neutralized the later threat of ballistics. Civilizations without the luxury of massive earthworks or vast plains relied entirely on manipulating extreme local geography. The hill forts of Rajasthan utilized extreme verticality. Structures like the Chittorgarh fortress integrated their exterior walls directly into the edges of sheer rock cliffs. Built 150 meters above the plains, these forts rendered direct mechanical siege physically impossible. Attackers were forced into long-term logistical attrition rather than structural combat. Japan faced a different geographic constraint: frequent earthquakes. Rigid stone and earth masses would collapse under seismic stress. Japanese fortresses required the flexibility of wood, layered over dry stone foundations, and a defense based on psychological routing rather than brute mass. Architects designed intricate maze-like moats and walled pathways, leading to narrow gates called koguchi, or tiger's mouth. These choke points physically broke up enemy troop formations, forcing them into localized crossfire zones. The physical structure of defense matches the primary local threat. In Japan, that meant seismic activity and coordinated infantry routing. In India, it meant leveraging gravity against brute force. Moving past the outer walls, the internal street layout of a city visually graphs the flow of political power within it. This diagrams a Japanese jokomachi, or castle town, an engine for absolute social control. The population was strictly segregated into distinct physical rings. Samurai resided directly outside the central keep for immediate deployment, while artisans and merchants were pushed to the vulnerable peripheries. The European free cities of Germany and Italy offer a sharp contrast. Through wealth and trade, many of these cities successfully bypassed royal authority. European cities pivoted away from the military keep, centering life instead on the piazza, a public square flanked by the civic administration of the city hall and the economic power of the guild halls. Surrounding the piazza was a dense, organic clustering of stone properties owned by the citizens themselves. This asymmetrical, non-grid layout reflected the decentralized economic power of early merchant republics. A city's center reveals its master. The Jokamachi projects military absolutism through concentric hierarchy, while the European piazza projects decentralized civic capital. The Chinese walled city presents a third model, distinct from both the organic clustering of Europe and the concentric rings of Japan. Urban planning in Imperial China was defined by a rigid, symmetrical north-south axis, perfectly demonstrated by the massive geometric alignment of the Forbidden City. This grid enforced feng shui cosmology. By aligning structures with the cardinal directions, planners physically linked the emperor's bureaucracy to the perceived order of the universe. The massive outer walls contained distinct administrative zones known as yamen, alongside dedicated agricultural tracts. This allowed the city to function as a self-contained macro unit of imperial control. The Chinese grid functioned as a mechanism of internal discipline, physically enforcing the symmetry of the imperial bureaucracy on the population living within it. Sustaining a massive population trapped inside rigid defensive geometries requires elite hydrostatic engineering and vast external supply lines. During the 17th century, public sanitation in rapidly growing European cities famously struggled with waste and disease. In contrast, the Japanese capital of Edo, modern Tokyo, achieved high standards of public hygiene. In 1652, engineers completed the Tamagawa Aqueduct, a 43-kilometer underground network of wooden pipes. This system reliably transported clean water to a hyperdense urban population. In China, urban survival depended on macroeconomic logistics, driven by the Grand Canal. This massive waterway integrated directly into the commercial architecture along its route. The canal allowed northern imperial cities to physically siphon agricultural wealth and tax grain from the south, binding disparate regions into a unified internal market. Japan's economic engine was driven by policy rather than a canal. The Sankin Kotai legally mandated that regional feudal lords continually commute between their territories and the capital. This massive migration forced the construction of a unified national highway system. The constant transit of elites rapidly accelerated the development of a national monetary economy to support their travel. The survival of a fortress city depended on its ability to monopolize and direct a nation's core infrastructure. While the physical stone walls and wooden keeps of these historical fortresses have mostly been torn down, their spatial algorithms remain permanently embedded in the earth. The layout of modern Tokyo is organized around a massive, unbuildable void at its exact center. The imperial palace, sitting precisely where Edo Castle once stood, forces the modern cityscape to flow entirely around it. Tokyo's highly complex, non-grid road networks and modern transit lines still trace the exact paths of the old concentric defensive rings of the original Jokamachi. In Europe, modern urbanist movements focused on walkability and human-scaled public squares are essentially a return to the blueprints of the medieval guild cities. Analyzing these historical castle towns reveals the foundational, stress-tested blueprints required to engineer resilient, sustainable cities for our own future.